One of my graduate students is doing some research on gender stereotypes in video games. So rather than looking at sort of the violent content in video games, which is what most of the researchers looked at, we're looking instead at the stereotypes that are depicted and how playing those video games influences different responses. So with the most recent study, we had men come in and play a video game either as a very sexy sort of character, female character, or as a more clothed female character. And we found that later on when they had to read about a rape scenario and make a judgment about was the victim to blame, those that played the very sexy video game character were actually more likely to blame the victim, sort of implied that she did something to deserve it compared to those that played with a fully clothed victim. I see it as having a lot of impact on the students that I interact with. A lot of the students that I teach, we have discussions about video games, for example, and they play a lot of video games and don't necessarily think that they have negative influence on them, so I think it could influence that way. I think racism and sexism are factors that are everywhere. You find them on every college campus and older individuals as well. So those topics I think are relevant. And we talk about how racism and sexism tends to be more subtle, not nearly as blatant. And a lot of my students can sort of come up with examples that they've seen either from in newspapers, things that people have said, or politicians, or that sort of thing that would apply. I think that I like it because it's fun for me, it's interesting, it piques my interest, and it also has, in terms of long-term goals, could lead to some actual social change. I think the more you know about anything, the more you understand it, the more you can change it. And so I think, for me, researching why people are racist or sexist, the factors that influence that, hopefully down the line would lead to us finding some ways to reduce it in the future. I would say when I'm teaching, my #1 goal is to get them excited. And for example, I teach research methods in psychology, which is sort of the dreaded class. And it's basically just talking about science and the scientific process. And I try to really just teach my students that science can be fun, it can be interesting, it's not nearly as dry and sort of scary as they think it is. And I try and bring in a lot of pop culture examples to kind of get that across. We watch Mythbusters, for example, from the Discovery Channel, to show that science can be fun and it can answer a lot of questions that they may have, and they may not realize that that is what psychologists study, is basically the science of people and why we do what we do. Okay. I like a lot of things. I would say the people. In terms of just my colleagues, I have some really close friendships here. People are just very friendly. And in terms of the students too, I have to say the different places I've taught at, the students here are very motivated, they're very polite. I always have the door opened for me. When I ask them how they're doing in the morning, they ask me back how I'm doing, which rarely happens at other places. And in psychology, the psych majors, they're really excited. They really want to be in psychology. They're not just doing it sort of as a side project. They have a lot of passion behind it. And if you just sort of give them those extra tools to teach them how to turn that passion into, going into grad school or into a career, then, you invest a little bit in them, and I think you can really see a big payoff.